Does safety make us safe? Is the question that we are pondering today on Totally Classic. Totally Classic is a podcast where two best friends get together and I should say, divergent uh, points of view, find the Venn diagram overlap of those seemingly divergent points of view. And I say that sort of defining and redefining something in rapid sequence, because I think that's going to be part of what we're addressing today. We live in a culture that in many ways is obsessed with safety, from safety belts to helicopter parents to nuclear arms accords to arguing over gun violence this past couple of weeks. Especially, we're recording this on April 7th, 2023. Happy belated Good Friday to anybody who listens to this. And so we're going to ask that question, and we're going to examine that question, how it plays out in society and how it plays out within ourselves. And despite divergence, a good conversation can always be had as long as you embrace curiosity and love. I'd say that's the central thesis of what we've been exploring so far in this, and I hope you enjoy it and bring along your own. I don't know about y'all, but like when I listen to a podcast, I absolutely speak back to the people who are in any sort of conversation or roundtable one. I'll start talking as though I'm in the room. So I highly encourage that with our podcast, even if you have to pause, because some of us, he says, pointing two fingers at himself, are loquacious. The loquacious one, my name is Brendan McNamara.
And I am Andy Swindler.
And this is Andy's question today. So Andy, take it away, buddy.
Does safety make us safe? Yeah, I feel like today's question had a few more variations and evolution than typical.
Yeah.
And this particular formation is intriguing, I think, to both of us because it allows us to examine the idea of what is safety, and then what is the outcome of that, perhaps more broadly. And in this moment, I'm thinking one way to look at that is safety feels more individual to me and probably more emotional in the way that it connects to what I believe is our most fundamental biological instinct, which is simply to carry on as an organism, which was one way to think about safety, right? It's just the most basic, like, am I not being subjected to any threat that could end the persistence of my organism or this life.
Yeah.
Whereas the idea of make us safe to me is like a broader concept of like, when you and I talk so much about different identities and different political structures and just, what are the perceptions of sort of what violence and harm is being done, perhaps often compared to reports that, if you dig deeper, might be contrary to popular opinion about who's safe and who is not.
Yeah.
And that, so under that question to me is really, what is the relationship between when fear leads us to make decisions, whether on a minute kind of individual basis, and then when does that same fear perhaps expand to creating policies? It could be anything as simple as maybe, I don't know if it's simple, but something at your local school, to an entire city, to expanding out into political realms. And this is right on the heels of yet another school shooting, which it should go without saying, but we're both, whatever disagreements we may have, we both agree that this is always a tragedy when there's a school shooting. And yet this one has some pretty interesting reaction points to it that we do feel worth exploring today, because it's a pretty interesting way to look at safety for different identity groups and sort of how we are socially responding to those notions. I live in Chicago. We just elected a new mayor, and it was my candidate of choice, Brandon Johnson. And there's some elements there that I'll touch on in regards to what I think is a relationship between supporting communities and mental health. I will say versus the police. Brandon hasn't committed to actually defunding the police, but I think he is committed to not funding them anymore. So he's kind of taken the absolute middle road there, as far as I can tell. But so that those are alive for me. I'll pass the baton back.
Yeah, this is one of those subjects that I want to be very cautious not to skip past my favorite part, which is delving into like semantics and being like, does is already, you could spend 45 minutes talking about does, another 45 about safety, make us. Oh my gosh, make could be its own thing, or make us is its own conversation. Us is an entire conversation, and then safe as compared to safety is almost this entire whole conversation. So I'm actively, I just want to speak to this. I'm actively resisting the impulse to do that, but I'm just addressing it like the elephant in the room. So the elephant feels seen. I think that's one of the most important things to do, by the way, with the elephants in the room, is at least let's not only just address them, like mention them, but I'd like turn and face the elephant. Let the elephant know, hey, I see you. And you know what, elephant? I'm going to incorporate you throughout this conversation naturally, because you're a big old elephant in the room. So it's inevitable that we'll speak about you. So that's what I'm going to say about all the semantic things, because I think you pointing towards the real world, and I'd like to point towards the world outside as well as the world within to address this. So I'm just saying that all in order to like kind of get it out of my body somewhat.
Very Banksy. I like that.
Yeah.
I think you just outlined the next 6 episodes, so that's great.
There you go. Yeah. So today we're really just going to focus on does. We're going to really question does. No, I think we're a hilariously sort of safety obsessed culture, and we're very bad at creating safety. So I think, for example, like child-led gentle parenting. We're in an era of gentle parenting. We're in an era of helicopter parenting to a degree that, especially as a parent in this era, remains hilarious and memeable on a daily basis from prior generations. Who see parents who basically have diaper bags for their kids at the sporting events, and the kids are like 10 years old. It's like, oh my gosh, you've never stopped. And you have like the juice box or the water bottle, the juice box and the water bottle and the snack. And the kid kind of like continually runs over to the parent, even though they're nigh on at puberty. And the parent is there at all the events. You know what I mean? We're in that, I think, phase of existence. And I think parenting is just one way that this is witnessed. But I think that assumption of parenting, and Pixar does a good job kind of addressing modern parenting, by the way, if anybody just wants to enjoy an animated version of probably what we're going to end up discussing more maturely, quote unquote, today. But I see that as and especially as it played out in the past 3 years, as what leads us to pretty harmful, unsafe instincts. I think chasing safety is where I think we're well past the Rubicon of trying to be far too safe. Because when you bring up words like harm and violence and that sort of thing, we're in an era where I don't know how many people, honestly, I don't know what percentage of the population believes this. I assume it's somewhere in the 10 to 20% of the US population believes that like words are harm or words are violence. So then if people are trying to stay safe from words, then I think we're well past. And to the degree that we've already seen, we've talked about in other episodes, to where the First Amendment, right, one of our our foundational like shared principles is just beyond under attack. That I think we've already gone too far, and it's shown that pursuing safety, or as many people term it, safetyism, it has made us profoundly less safe, meaning that we're profoundly less stable, and we're in such a heightened state of fear about things that are not existential, but ideological, at best, assaults upon ourselves. That's kind of I'm sort of trying to miasma my way into like, I don't know, what is going on around me. But back to you before I start getting into how that affects me personally.
Yeah. one thing I'm reminded of, I know I've referenced the book Sand Talk before, written by an indigenous man in current day Australia, and an Aboriginal man. And he, one of the things in that book he references is just how we stunt the growth. We quite broadly, I might reference as, the West, stunt the growth of our children, which I think you just referenced in a variety of ways.
Yeah.
And while at the same time, generally, I think I perceive us, I'll speak very broadly, looking down on cultures where children are maybe have their own children at a much younger age than we might find acceptable, which I believe, you might know this, but I believe the age here, at least I'll just zero this back down to America, at least, is increasing. Like, we're having children much and much later, into our 30s and even our 40s, which I think is referred to as a geriatric pregnancy. So it's
I think anything past like 34 is a geriatric pregnancy, I think, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, which, and that's probably a whole separate topic, like unpack that. But he's referencing, like, hey, we in our Aboriginal culture, we're allowing our children to mature at a more natural pace, which means they mature more quickly, which means that they're actually more or less aligned with the biology of nature when we actually become able biologically to have children. And you can read the book, there's a lot of stuff in there, but that comes to me. It's just like, yet a sub question, like, how are we stunting our growth and our maturity in our children, and to what end? Is how much of that is just some conscious or subconscious desire for them to remain children? Because I don't know, I don't think I've ever met a parent who was thrilled that their little child was no longer a little child. That's a hard thing, I imagine, as a parent.
It can be difficult. I think in general, we are a society, and this is maybe just somewhat a consequence of being like phenomenally wealthy, relatively speaking, to many other parts of the world, is that we want to stay young forever. And so if our children go up, then that means we're grown up, and then, oh no. And again, I speak to this again, pointing fingers at the society and pointing fingers back at myself, because I think I've talked about this podcast. I've only, since I turned 40 and had already had children, I started referring to myself as a man. That's a brand new thing for me. Would never even consider it. And there are certainly many cultures around the world where when you're 12, 13, bar mitzvah age, you become a son of the commandment. You're like, today you're a man. Or when a girl begins her menses, then it's like, today you are a woman. We don't have much of that in our culture. And we certainly are like, we might use that language. I'm sure plenty of people still do, but we don't. We are more and more like neurologically aware. You're like, well, the brain doesn't really finish evolving or growing or whatever until late 20s. So then, really, are you even an adult? Are you even ready for these things? And blah, 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 as though somehow, again, this sense of evolution or completion is necessary for maximal safety. Funnily enough, though, look at our culture, like our children are, keeping it on children, our children are going through puberty like as young as has ever happened in recorded history. So it's very funny that there are children as young as 7, 8, 9 going through puberty pretty regularly. I think it tends to occur with more frequency in amongst Black folks for some reason. And there's all sorts of, 7 different theses as to why that's occurring. But in some ways, I feel it is a deliberate trying to stunt the growth of our children, perhaps on purpose. In order that we can stunt our own growth, and because maybe in some ways we feel unsafe in stepping into positions of authority, even in our own lives, because there's a lot, with great power comes great responsibility. There's a Spider-Man problem there.
Yeah, and since you didn't exactly mention this, but you remind me, I've spoken to a number of Black parents who, a thing, unfortunately, in their culture is to have the talk. Is to say, look, when you encounter a police officer and various other, whether they hold that kind of power and literally like a lethal weapon, or hell, in this day and age, we might assume anybody's carrying a lethal weapon. Just to say, there are certain ways you ought to behave, that you
Yeah.
need to behave in order to remain safe. That will increase your chances of surviving and decrease your chances of having a harmful, if not lethal, altercation. And it just breaks my heart every time I hear one of those stories, because that's just so far from my worldview. So
Oh,
in
interesting.
that way, yeah. So in that way, and this may be one area we diverge a bit, but from my worldview, and we've said it many times, but I tend to collect more stories like that probably than read studies about it. And you probably do both, but I know you go much deeper in the studies. It's just not something I can really relate to.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, growing up in a small town in Missouri as a white boy, I just roamed free. I mean, and so there's a lot of things there, and I don't chalk all of that up to being white, or even male, really. I mean, a lot of that had to do with that time period, in the 80s in a small town where it just, I don't know, things felt different. I don't know if they actually were different or if they just felt different. I don't remember hearing about school shootings, and or being I don't remember. I never once growing up had a fear of going to school, other than, okay, now this is actually an interesting thing to divide, because I didn't fear. It never even crossed my mind that somebody might show up to a school and with a gun and start shooting people. That's just so far out.
Oh, interesting. I've been talking about this to people the week. Yeah.
On the other hand, do I feel fear often? Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Was I afraid to go to school for personal reasons and emotional reasons?
Yes.
Yeah. Just for all the maybe typical reasons a kid might have. As an empath, I'm a little extra sensitive to certain things. I was very afraid in the 8th grade because I was in a new school. I was bullied. I was very lonely. So that but even there, that's interesting for me to pick apart in the moment, like the two sides of this particular question, I think, which is, objectively, do children have a reason to be afraid now for their lives? Which I think is yes, compared to when we grew up. And then what is the idea that anybody may show up and be afraid, regardless of their identity or their history or any part of it?
Yeah. I think we're always afraid. Well, that's interesting. I think this is one of the cool things that is hopefully helpful for people in the general premise of the show. It's like that people can talk about anything. There's no thing that they're like, oh no, if I bring this up, whatever, I'm going to be canceled, or this person's going to hate me. And listen, that'll happen to you in the world. I think there's so many stories about that, you know what I mean? That people like in college, that's like a prevalent statistic now, that people are like, oh, you feel like you can't express certain views or you'll be ostracized. So maybe that is happening. I still can't tell if it's happening or if it's just being reported more. You know what I mean? So there's a bias of coverage, kind of the same way with shootings or whatever. But the funny thing is this is a cool thing is, so I was given the talk. I grew up in many small towns, like as a white dude, but I was absolutely given the talk of like, here's how you're supposed to talk to police. I think by the time I was 7 or 8, I'd certainly had encounters with the police, where police like took, what was that? This is like 3rd or 4th grade, at least. Police, we always knew that if police came, you ran. Although my mom taught me that her dad taught her, so her dad gave her the talk that was like, when police come, you like, one of the first things you need to know is, when she was like a kid, she would play out in the streets or whatever. She was like, when the cops come and everyone runs, because that's the natural instinct of children, at least in my life experience for multiple generations, when the cops come, you run, you get away from the police as fast as you can. The police are essentially, for me, a multi-generational threat. Police are a threat. Secondly, her dad told her, though, don't run. Like, you don't run, you don't make yourself prey, essentially. So if everyone runs, they look guilty. And so they're the people that are going to be chased down, essentially. So if you say, if you haven't done anything wrong, stay still. It'll be like T-Rex. Don't move and they cannot spot you. Don't breathe. They're not like raptors, okay? They're more like T-Rexes. No, I just watched Jurassic Park recently. I frightened my 7-year-old daughter with it. She wasn't ready. Sorry, kid. But you know what? Again, I'm the father, and this is part of my thesis too, is that we've in sort of post-feminism, and I consider myself a feminist. This is why we've gotten to this oversafe culture. But yeah, you run from the police, and then I've had to sort of talk, I think, in multi-stages throughout my life as to like how to deal with the police. And of course, this is also to do with the fact that my mother has had encounters, like negative encounters with the police. I don't know, dozens of times or whatever. So I like have a life experience, and my dad, has had many negative consequent, like, so I've just come from a family that like we have an adversarial relationship to the police, even while knowing, we might know people, a couple degrees away from people who are cops. So I've had to talk my whole life. So that's like very normal to me. And then I've been afraid.
Can I ask a
go ahead.
Follow question?
Yeah.
Was it about getting caught or about getting killed or both?
It would be about getting caught, and then the harm, in some ways it was like the nebulous harm that they could do to you, and that cops can get away with. I've known this since very young. Cops can get away with all manner of violence. That's kind of part of what makes them police, is their ability to like get away with stuff. Now, I'm opposed to qualified immunity, that degree of protection, but I understand the importance, safety wise, of there being a safety group who can get away with assault. Like a police officer can assault pretty much anybody, because to grab someone, to touch someone is assault. I've been threatened with assault by police officers multiple times in the past couple of years. They're very willing and ready to do it, by the way, folks. Doesn't matter who you are. They're happy to threaten you within. I've been threatened just for asking why. So now no one's pulled a gun on me yet just for asking why. So that can go up and down. But yeah, they just general, I would say general harm. They can do you harm, and they can do you harm and get away with it. So they can crack your skull open, and then just be like, yeah, he tried to run. So I busted his skull open. I've also been afraid of school shooters since I was probably 7 years old, of people coming into that. Now this was through media. There was definitely kids who brought weapons to school since I was little or whatever. But again, I've lived in like New England and redneck areas and stuff like that. So then like whatever, rednecks are used to people being violent. Although I've never thought of myself a redneck till I moved to that. I've always thought of myself more as white trash, but it's a different category. However, I've been afraid of school shooters largely because of an Australian movie called Fortress that came out in like the early 80s, and Red Dawn. So to me, I've been distinctly aware of that feeling of being like, what is that sound, while sitting in my school desk, and be like, when you hear a weird sound, you're like, oh my gosh, wait, is this the moment when people came in? It was always going to be men. I've never been afraid of women coming in and shooting. So that was an interesting thing about the Nashville shooting. And I've mostly, I would say, been afraid of like agents of foreign governments and or the US government. So I've been afraid of like soldiers, usually like either self-appointed soldiers or soldiers sort of from somewhere else. Although also like people who are there to like kidnap and harm. I've been kind of scared of that my whole life. So I just think that's interesting, because we have a lot of identity points. We went to the same college, you know what I mean? We have a lot, and if you looked at us side by side, we would have a ton of categorizations in common. But just vastly different life experiences in that realm. I think into the awareness of the lack of safety in the world.
Yeah, I feel like, I don't know. I need to go back. I feel like I watched Red Dawn, or at least heard about it, but I can't really remember much of anything about it.
Yeah, I was allowed to watch a lot of things when I was at my dad's house when I was a kid.
Well, that doesn't sound safe. No.
In some ways it wasn't. In some ways it wasn't.
Well, but in the context of, and I don't know if I connected that earlier, as we tend to wander around, but the idea of connecting all of that back to the maturity of children and the growth of children, and even you, I don't know, maybe taking a risk with Jurassic Park, saying, well, maybe it worked, maybe it didn't. Another one that comes to me, I just was flying last week, and I mean, most people, I'll just name in the way that we talk about it, like in the woke community, woke religion, would suggest that it's unlikely, if not impossible, for somebody who looks like me to be pulled aside at the airport. Well, last week I was pulled aside and had a very intimate, down to the groin frisk
Yeah.
out in public. They did give me the option to go in a room, and I was like, no, I don't care.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. I mean, I was wearing like joggers and a t-shirt. Maybe they were too
Yeah.
loose for them to really. Maybe that's it. If they're loose, it's easier to conceal a weapon or something. But
Sure.
I'm just like, all right, well, data point of one. That led me to believe it might be more random than not. But again, I tend to skew, as a lot of us, I think, in this society do, which often kind of seems to just blow your mind. How many of us skew towards anecdotal evidence versus, actually going and finding a study about who's profiled and who's frisked and whatnot.
Oh yeah, that sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah, no,
and yet,
I think that's mostly how I think anecdote though sparks for me, it sparks interest. So I'm like, oh, wait, and then because then I have to, for my own reckoning, I'd be like, well, wait, is this typical? Is this atypical? Did they do this for this particular reason? Because I remember post 9/11, my stepmom, who's Persian, Irani, and she looks and has a name that would suggest she's from somewhere over there. That she had more flat, like there was an uptick in the amount of times that she was her bags were pulled aside. So I think we definitely have anecdotally, I've noticed that before. And the same thing is, but I was like, okay, well, that's something to look out for. And then my curiosity goes, okay, well, is that happening regularly? Or am I some sort of statistical outlier? Same thing, even questioning, this is why, anecdotes interesting as to like, I had the talk, or I've been afraid of school shooters my whole life. Is that typical? That's just my personal experience. I have no idea if that's prevalent amongst people of our generation, divided by racial category or anything like that. I don't even know if anyone's conducted such an experiment.
We shall see.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to, I think we'll probably weave in and out of police, and as you mentioned, like the state monopoly on violence. And I do want to, well, I'll just say now, so speaking quite broadly, I do believe that building community and connection and having honesty and integrity together and being able to really have hard conversations and really know each other and come together, as I think is what we always attempt to do here.
Yeah.
That ultimately, in mental health, and we could list a lot of things, like I believe generally that makes us safer as a species.
I think that's why we pursue it too. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas I do consider myself an abolitionist when it comes to the police. And rationally, I consider that to be like taking a really extreme view to try to bend something. I'm not entirely convinced, and this may seem totally contradictory to naming myself as abolitionist. I'm not entirely convinced that in this moment in time, that police serve absolutely no valuable purpose, nor should every single person in prison be released immediately. I don't believe that would actually make us safer to do that.
Yeah.
I do. The reason I say an abolitionist, I do imagine some distant, many generation world down the road that has so deeply invested in community and family and societal structure and just mental health that those things become almost or entirely unnecessary by any reasonable measure of it.
Mm-hmm. You mean like having you'd always need some sort of enforcement of force, and you'll always need it in some sort of multiplication, meaning to overpower the powerful who are seeking to harm another. But you mean as like a centralized consistent unit, essentially?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That can just kind of come in and, like you said, they have a pretty ridiculous amount of power. I think whether we say it or not, most of us probably believe and just know that they can commit a lot of violence and basically get away with it.
Yeah.
And I think that happens in a lot of smaller ways than we often see on the TV or sort of we're naming here and there, or we're trying to hold them more accountable. And there are examples of communal structures where that don't really have a police force.
Yeah.
And if somebody where like it's seen as if somebody commits harm, that's basically treated like a mental illness right off the bat, and then brought into a communal structure and treated with love and compassion and all of that. So I don't know, it's just hard to, in this moment from where I sit, I believe in it, and yet it is actually hard to visualize like what that society looks like, the sort of post-police, non-police society looks like. So, and I just think, well, how, and I don't know, I don't know how much I trust anybody who says otherwise, because we've all grown up in this, and it's surrounding us, and it's just in the air, and it's in the water, and it's in our blood.
Yeah.
So one thing I also wanted to say is about like there's something in the worlds that I'm in often with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and activism, and social justice, et cetera, where we talk about safe space versus brave space. And I totally understand the argument for brave space. I mean, to me, it's both. But some people think it's an either or. They're like, well, no, it's not. We can't make the space safe.
Yeah.
Especially for certain people, like safety is impossible for certain identity groups.
Yeah.
It just doesn't exist. So it's about being a brave space where we can come, and I think as we do here, actually, I mean, like I've said from the very beginning, like this is my space to be more raw and to experiment and to be less edited, right? And I'm sure I'm going to say things, I'll go back later and be like, oh crap, I said that.
Yeah. Just to be straight up incorrect. Yeah, just say things and be like, oh yeah,
right.
I was wrong. Whoops. All right, well, cool. Keep trying.
Right. like how liberating is that, right? Not to have to feel like I have to walk this tightrope.
Yeah.
That's also why I've never really publicized this. So but so that's intriguing to me. And I'm now with a company that has, we've gone all in on like safe space technology, and it's just like everything, it has nuance. So to me, that's about psychological safety. So again, like what makes us feel like, and then that relates to basically regulating our nervous systems. And then that connects to all sorts of things around trauma, which I'm still pretty early in exploring, I think. And it ties back to something you said earlier about like our words harm. And the way I'm currently connecting that they can be harm is if we re-trigger, re-traumatize somebody, or re-trigger a traumatic response, then the nervous system, their person's nervous system will react in a way and release all kinds of chemicals and things that, if done like once or twice, to escape a threat, are designed that way. But if are done perpetually over and over and over, I think do cause harm, right? And just what they do to the body. So that's the way I would connect the idea that, do words cause harm? And the last thing I'll say is another little anecdote I heard from somebody in one of my communities the other day, I don't know the whole story, but they came from a lot of traumatic, they had a lot of trauma earlier in their life. And then they came to a group probably similar to the ones I'm often in. And, somebody, I can't remember if they were like doing agreements about safety, or if somebody just named like, I don't feel safe. And then this person is just like flabbergasted. I mean, I think genuinely confused. Like she's like, what are you talking about? Like, there's cookies over there. Like we're all sitting, I don't know where it was, but like, let's say we're all sitting in like a church, like meeting room, and there's like cookies and refreshments, and, because where they came from, like safety meant like, no, I'm like in threat of physical violence.
The door's locked and someone is beating me.
Like how could this environment where we're all just talking and sitting and having refreshments, so it was fascinating to hear them say that, and just really think like, oh my God, like safety means so many different things to so many different people.
Yeah, well, I think that's the key thing. That's why dialogue is necessary, to determine basically who is having what would be termed a quote unquote mental health crisis. Meaning, or that's how we used to say it, and I'm totally fine with this. I don't understand. I'm down with, like, someone's crazy. You know what I mean? Crazy is just doesn't have to be. I know people, it has a stigma. We're all crazy sometimes, and that's totally fine. I think human beings are crazy generally. So meaning they act irrationally and act irrationally repeatedly, and they do things contrary to their own, let's say, safety, right? I think it's very normal. So if someone says, oh my gosh, I don't feel safe, really that key question is that true? You know what I mean? This is always my thing with feelings in general. So then you don't just go, oh gosh, let's attend to that person as though they are unsafe explicitly, because in many ways you don't want to in any way exacerbate their false feelings, if they are false feelings of lack of safety, because a really good question is like, is safety really truly relative? No, it is, of course, depending on the ability for someone to withstand punishment. And I think that we're, as a society, already see this heading. And I know this may sound silly, but ice baths are an excellent example of how we as a society are becoming very culturally interested in extreme adverse conditions and placing ourselves daily in extreme adverse conditions in order to stimulate all those responses, evolutionary survival responses, and say, shut up, shut your mouth. You don't get to rule me. You don't rule me. And these are, this is a great thing about, I've done ice baths or whatever. I don't love them. I don't find it enormously pleasant. But it provokes that from a truly evolutionary, deep, no, you are unsafe. This, if you were to stay here for extended periods of time, harm could eventually come to you. It provokes in a response that's saying, oh no, you're in a place that's not safe for your body. This is way too cold for your survival. You will die if you fell into this water out in the world, for example, in a place where ice would be on water and water would be this cold, you could certainly die. It is absolutely within the realm of genuine threat. And at the same time, no, also right now, this is not a threat. So having to now, of course, this is the thing, this is voluntary, but at what point does someone become so unsafe? Because the more adverse events you avoid, the tighter and tighter your little safety, or in some ways, the looser and looser your safety bubble gets. And then your bubble is wide. And then once your safety bubble is 15 feet wide, you're a crazy person. Because then you're literally seeing threats where there aren't. That's a function of schizophrenia. So we are well aware of that functioning in that way. So that's an interesting thing I think that we all need to do. And that's the thing I never understood about being triggered. You're like, being triggered? Oh, good. Now let's work through that together. Let's kind of breathe through that together. Let's do through that. But you don't go, oh, okay, well, we can't talk about that. Or this is a space where you won't be, where those things won't happen. You're like, I don't know how safe is that for everyone? Because at least for me, I feel phenomenally unsafe in a safe space. I feel very unsafe in a space where then people can just say, I don't feel safe. And then that means we all have to stop talking about that thing, or we all have to stop even pushing on that particular issue. In which case I like being a naturally contrary personality, is because I am hopefully helpful to the world. And that when someone has that response and I was like, okay, well, your response causes the opposite response in me. So then what do? We're 1-on-1 right now. Now, as a Christian, I'm here to serve you ultimately in a lot of ways. But my question there is what best serves you? Does it serve you to sort of acquiesce to your concept of safety? Or I would say we have to examine what is genuine safety, because in order for me to love you, I have to work only for your highest good. And if your highest good is continued provocation when you don't feel safe, then that's what I do. If your highest good is relief from that pressure, then that's what I do. But I don't instinctively know, and neither do you, which one that is. which makes pursuing actual safeness, no doubt, a very complicated process.
Yeah. I was just jotting something down. Going back to the ice bath piece, I have heard anecdotally that that's very good for the nervous system.
Yeah.
I'm looking at a book actually over my shelf. I don't think I ever finished, but it was really good. The first part anyway. That's just my MO, by the way. Not for this person to take it personally. Should he ever hear this? But Damon Young, and he starts out by telling a story. I can't remember where he was, but I think it was a river, and it was like all these people were doing like the polar bear plunge thing. And
Yeah.
and he just starts out the book by saying like, that is some white boy shit. Like I don't have to go jump in a freezing river to get that rush or to volunteer for, you know, the temporary, you know, thrill of being unsafe or whatever. So he just reminded me of that.
That's funny. Yeah, and that's a great thing. No, but that's a great quote though. And he's wrong. He's full on wrong.
And I'm sure I'm woefully misquoting it because
no, but even so, like he's listen, share that first thought. It's perfectly normal for us to have thoughts that are incorrect. I'm sure I've said some today already, but like he's 100% wrong. Get in, man. You have to get in and see, don't you? You have to get in and see, like, oh, have I had this degree of an unsafe response to something out in the world? I mean, cool. If you have, then that would help me learn from you. That I was like, oh, if you felt this, where you literally are like, oh, essentially, when you get in an ice bath, I don't know, this happens for everybody, it happens for me. I was like, oh, cool. This is probably the closest thing I've had to a panic attack. Where you're like, I can barely control my breathing. I feel highly unsafe. Oh no, am I going to die? My body's demanding I get out of it, escape the scenario, go run away, get somewhere safe, get out of this situation. And I can't, and like it, and I'm having enormous difficulty even just like finding a baseline. I was like, I don't even know where my baseline of like calm is.
Yeah.
So I don't know. So in some ways it is helpful for me in that sense. But it is funny. Yes, it does. And I completely understand the joke version of it. Yes, it does seem like some white boyish.
Right. Well, and I want to touch on one thing you said. Another book I'm actually close to finishing.
Yeah.
Is the Body Keeps the Score, and I don't mean to suggest everything in that book is or any book. You know, I mentioned that to somebody at an event recently. They're like, "Oh, that book's controversial," and I was like, any fucking book on psychology should be controversial. It's a very young science.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't trust any psychologist who thinks we've actually figured it all out. And that's actually, it's funny now that I'm so interested in psychology, because I wish I'd somehow met the people who know that earlier, because I might have actually studied it more formally. I just had some idea that like, well, psychologists think they've got it all figured out, but thankfully, so many of them realize that's a total fallacy. But one thing in this book, I mean, it's all about Bissell van der Kolk's research into trauma and quite direct treatment in various ways. And as an aside, I mean, it's one of the reasons I like Brandon Johnson, our new mayor, because he's the only one I've heard mention a program in Chicago called Treatment Not Trauma. You know, along with closing, I think the largest school closure in our nation's history several years ago with my former teacher at our esteemed college, Rahm Emanuel. We've also closed a bunch of mental health clinics, and it just, I don't know why this is controversial. You know, it's like what the fuck? Like, I don't care who you are. Like, we should support mental health now more than ever. And especially with trauma, because you know, and I'm not gonna probably do a great job reiterating this, but you know, he talks a lot about why that phenomenon exists that you just mentioned. You know, why do people see threats when they don't objectively exist?
Yeah,
and that's a very common, natural way that the body responds to extreme trauma, especially persistent, you know, chronic trauma. And to me, that's a layer within all of it that's incredibly confusing. And I think you and I often talk about where, like, who gets the voice or who gets the attention. And even with this recent shooting, it just kind of feels like, well, we gotta kind of choose one group to uplift or to support.
Yeah.
Let's actually bookmark that because I know you've got strong opinions about that. But two quick stories about safety. One rolling back to summer of 2020. I don't know what we're calling it. I don't know if it was the summer of love or the summer of protest or the summer of getting the fuck out of our houses or something. But
Yeah.
there was a big event we hosted, and I'm involved with defund CPD, defund the police here in Chicago.
Yeah.
And there's a lot I can say about that. We spend, I think, $1.4 billion on our police force. They're highly militarized. I mean, all kinds of things. So, and even as I earlier admitted, like, yes, I could see some value in having police. To me, that's just egregious. And I don't think personally pouring more police into this sort of current situation in Chicago is going to lead to more safety. And in this story, so we had, right, and this was, I don't know, for those of us who were doing lockdown, we talked a lot about that, that even being a pretty major distinction between our lives.
Yeah.
But here in Chicago, most of us really were. So I think a lot of that here, even going out and doing the protests and all, I mean, it was a perfect storm of lots of things, right? And part of it was like an excuse to get the hell out of the house. I judge for many of us.
For sure, absolutely.
And so we had basically this big party. I mean, it was the first time, in summer in Chicago, this. I mean, my God, we spend all winter being like, oh my God, it's almost summer. And we were still like not able to do anything or be with each other. So we had this big party on something called Freedom Square, and I won't explain all of that right now, but and there was some press there, and it was outdoor, and it was really a beautiful gathering. All masks, by the way, which was funny. I distinctly remember this one Black gentleman just being really vocal about the masks and just being like, "You're all being indoctrinated. Like, this is like the masks are like ridiculous." And and we were all kind of like, "Well, we're just going to kind of do it. It seems like the right thing." But then the thing I really want to get to is at the end of it, it was all done. I was like on crash duty, and so I was one of the last people there, and I distinctly remember I was actually standing there with two women friends. Almost nobody was left, and a middle-aged Black woman came up and just started borderline, screaming at us, and she was just like, "What the hell are you doing? You come in here, you have a big party, you want to talk about getting rid of the police, and then you're gone, and then you're out of here, and then you're, she's like, we need the police, they keep us safe." And then she went around. There were flyers that somebody had put up all around this little square, and she just went around and was like taking down like every single one of these flyers. And then it was hard, because I just, at the end of a day where I was like, oh yeah, we've got it all figured out. Defund CPD. This is it. Yeah. And then so it was hard and deflating, but in a really healthy way for me to be like, oh shit, this is not nearly as simple as I would like it to be.
Oh gosh, right. Yeah.
That we can just sort of make the police go away, and that's gonna, that everybody agrees with that, especially the people who are there, living in that neighborhood, right? Where I'm still a tourist, even though I volunteered there for like 3 years. I'm still a tourist. So there's that story, and then one just from yesterday, something that's hard for me, actually, which is interesting, being holding identity as a man, but I'll say, but embodying a lot of feminine energy, which I would describe as more like flow and connection rather than like rigidity and container building. But one thing I've learned is that containers, and that can mean a lot of different, it could be actual containers or metaphorical, but in this case, building a strong container in the context of a meeting agenda. I got feedback afterwards that people felt more at ease. And they used the word safe, right? They said, like, I felt safe because I had clarity, right? So there's that. And then I often will refer to like a playground. Just think about a playground. Like how do we have to build a playground, or how do we choose to build a playground to make kids feel safe? There's probably a fence. There's probably a bunch of adults standing around. There's probably 6 inches of whatever. Foam or rubber at the bottom of the thing.
Those weird wood chips that somehow don't get splinters from too often.
I know. I'm like, I don't know. Well, yeah. And when we were growing up, it was, I mean, who knows? And that's like probably speaking of a more affluent, right? I mean, like lots of kids play on like concrete playgrounds.
Yeah, that's what I grew up on. Yeah,
but like, and with all of that safety, they're still gonna scrape their elbow,
oh,
right?
for sure. Yeah,
And
and
so
that's
the
good.
last
We
thing,
want them to. Yeah.
I'm doing more monologuing today than usual.
No,
But
no, it's fun.
the-
I love it. You know, I love it.
But the last thing I'll say is, when people push against safe space, I'll sometimes say, well, it's kind of like safe sex.
Yeah.
Like is sex ever really safe at an emotional level?
No.
I mean,
No,
maybe,
that's kind of why it's fun.
right?
Yeah.
So, but it kind of puts in a lot of the same things. Like we can talk about physical safety, we can talk about disease, we can talk about, as you often do, the unborn, we can talk about the emotional, characteristics.
Yeah.
So I don't know. There's something there I want to keep exploring, but I'll pause for now.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. It's well, let's actually, I know this is going to be very Chicago nerdy, so we'll keep it relatively brief. But like, so Brandon Johnson's an interesting case, right? Where so he's a teachers union organizer.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Hardcore.
So I know in your world that like abolishing the police is like a popular refrain, and I'm certainly adjacent to that. And I'm probably more into like a defund. My aim wouldn't be abolition ultimately, because I would basically, my abolition would involve me just reforming what would essentially be a police structure anyway. But I love abolition in general because I'm an abortion abolitionist. So like and I think your aim should be exactly what you want always, as opposed to what you think you can get. So, I herald you in that. But I am also adjacent to a ton of worlds that want to abolish the teachers union, considering it one of the most harmful organized bodies in certainly in the United States of America. And so it's fascinating to me. I was like, Brandon Johnson, especially in this, like having a focus on like mental health and treatment. You talked about school closures. I was like, he was part of the organization that advocated for school closures, which were all harm, but fostered out of a quote unquote safety claim. You know what I mean? An attempt to be safety, like in sort of an attempt of doing a safety maneuver, definably and definitively only made us less safe in like a hilarious, I mean, in terms of violence, self-harm, violence against others rose in the city, self-harm rose up in the city, alcoholism rose in the city. It eventually led to, it allowed literally segregation return to the city, all of which something that he advocated for was the tip of the spear of. And so I was just fascinated that I was like, I understand it was like a Democrat versus a Democrat. So in that way, there's like, you can't relate. Maybe it didn't come up as much in the thing, but I was like, how did he answer that if he's saying that he wants to like help the community, when I was like, he was specifically an advocate of something that harmed in many ways, like the most vulnerable people in the community for no benefit. You know what I mean? Like you could say there's some benefit for police, right? I would say there's some benefit of police. They do catch some criminals. They do take some domestic violence people away from committing domestic violence. They catch robbers, on the whole, are they more harm than benefit? I think it's an excellent question that we should be constantly examining. But there was no benefit to school closures that anyone could, that I've ever seen. And I've looked into, literally, I have a file on my phone. You can scroll like 2-3 times in my notes folder, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 15 studies. So I'm fascinated in some ways. I was like, how did he win on that? Like, that's fascinating to me. Like, or how is he pushed on that, especially in terms of people being so concerned about violence in the city? It obviously, what he did created more, led to correlatively, I should say, as opposed to causatively, to be certain, correlatively led to learning loss. Kids are stupider, they know less, they're hurting each other more often. Like, did he sort of disavow that throughout that? Like, how did he get out from under that? Because I'm very curious as to, like, in terms of safe space, he created a more deadly and dangerous space actively through his actions as because to me, like, again, that's like someone as weird as someone being like a member of the police force. Like when Kamala Harris got to be vice president, and she was, for years, she was like top cop. And I was like, in defund the police era, we have a vice president who is top cop. Like, what in the, like, that's such cognitive dissonance to me. as to our
Yeah.
our stated desires. Like, how did he win? Or was the other guy just that terrible?
It was really easy to paint Valis as like the devil. I mean,
Yeah, he was a school guy too. So in
know,
some ways they did the same wrong things, but
he was like the business guy, right?
Okay,
Like
okay.
he was more, yeah, he's been the CEO of different school districts. And
yeah, okay.
I think literally that title, which is interesting.
Yeah,
right?
I saw that too. I've never seen that
A
before.
CEO versus a superintendent or whatever.
Yeah.
And this is an area where I never go quite deep enough. I'd like to think I go deeper than like the average American, but that's pathetic in terms of actually being an informed voter. Being an informed voter.
Yeah.
I mean, lots of people I know who are deep in like deliberative democracy spaces are like, yeah, like popular vote by the average citizen is not actually the way to, have you could argue that that's like a true democracy, but that's not necessarily the way that leads to the best policies that are going to have the best outcomes for people. Because the average person doesn't really have a fucking clue like how a lot of these systems work. And that's me too. So I don't entirely know. What I would correlate, just kind of like what I see in my activist groups, is a deeply pro-union attitude generally. Just pro-labor unions. And there are reasons for that. I mean, in terms of the working wage and the getting the weekend, and there's certainly things that unions have accomplished over the years. But what I'm always tracking, and I think to some extent you are maybe using different language, just like, but what happens when we concentrate power? So that's I don't personally just trust unions because they were fighting against a worse system, which I think that's true generally. That's why they appeared. And yet there's any huge concentration of power like that almost inevitably leads to some misstep, if not outright corruption. So I think it's very wise to interrogate the teachers union in particular. Like, both my parents are teachers. So I've got a general bias towards teachers, and I think it's probably easy if not misguided to sort of accidentally just be like, oh well, the teachers union, that's a bunch of teachers, ergo.
Interesting.
Right. Like, it's a union, first of all, good social justice stuff. It's teachers, cool. Teachers are great. And then we, I don't know, a lot of us probably stop there. I have one good friend who was actually, we were split on this, and he was voting for Valis, and I was just, gently kind of trying to have a dialogue about it, which he actually shut down because he was just like, it's like my personal vote. It's like, it's a very personal thing for me. I don't want to talk about it. Which was really disappointing because I wasn't coming in hard. I was just like, I literally want to learn. I literally want, we do here. I'm like our dialogues have really taught me and sort of spoiled me on like having dialogue and learning about other viewpoints in a way that I'm like, when that doesn't happen now, I'm like, oh man.
Come on, it's like, I promise it's good.
And one of the things he cited was like, look, I'm just, like, but the teachers union association is not going to win me over. Like, that's I have no love for the teachers union. So I don't know. I will continue to look into it. I just assume a lot of people either made just sort of the general correlations that I just named, or maybe we're willing to look past it for a variety of other reasons. I don't know.
It's fine. I think it makes an interesting test case, because people are like, what do you find safety in? And if you find, I think people find perceptions of safety in perceptions of safety as opposed to safety itself. If that makes sense. Oh, can we pause this for a emergency bio break? I'll be right back, and then we can crash for a landing.
I need one too. Here we are back, taking care of ourselves. Oh, this is something I'll share from earlier this week. I went to a Zoom gathering, a group I really enjoy very much around healing. And I just couldn't, I just was beyond done for the day. And I just checked in my check-in. I was like, and I'm checking out. And then somebody put in the chat, somebody said in the chat, thank you for taking care of Andy for us. And I was like, That makes me feel safe when I have permission to go do what I need to do.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to restate, it was just nagging me a little, I think, how it came out earlier. I think I said something like, I can't imagine anybody, or I don't trust anybody who says they can imagine a post-police, non-police, truly abolitionist world.
Yeah.
I want to retract that because I so believe in the power of human imagination, as I know to
Yeah.
you,
Yeah.
being even more officially involved with the world of fictional storytelling than I am. So I absolutely believe we must be able to imagine it and imagine whatever future state we are trying to achieve.
Yeah.
What I would restate though is that I don't trust anybody who says they know exactly how to get there. I
Oh,
just
yeah.
think it is far too complex, and that validates the whole premise of our show is we actually need to come together with people who have really pretty wildly different ideas about how we might get there or what that even looks like.
Yeah.
So
Well, you know from organizing people how difficult it is even to agree to that goal or whatever. I've been off and on involved with the pro-life community or whatever, and those who seek abolition are a vocal, but probably, let's be honest, probably a statistical minority amongst those who profess to the hold to the moniker of pro-life. So then even getting people to agree that that's the goal is monumentally difficult.
Absolutely.
I mean, in some ways, you can only imagine it. You can only imagine getting an entire group to agree to an actual goal in order to get to some sort of conclusion. And this is why people love, benevolent despot theory. That if you can get, okay, well, if one person states the goal, and then we all work towards making that goal happen. I mean, that's why I think in some ways there's great comfort in the achievements of, let's say, corporate America, or of work existence. When you're like, you know what, I just love it. It's simple. We're just trying to meet quota on this and this and this. And then we all go, do we all agree? Doesn't even matter sometimes, but is that what we're all doing? Yes. Okay, now how do we achieve that? That's neurologically, chemically very satisfying, and I think that's what can waylay us though in quote unquote real life in terms of safety, where it's just like, can we all agree? Okay, my group is agreed, right? We saw this with whatever, we can go back to masks, masking, right? Like, we agree. We all agree masking is good because again, it came down from on high, from more of a corporate structure. Where it's like the CEO, whatever, the head of the NIH says the mask, or head of CDC, where it was Renfield at the time. Yeah, so the CDC says, so okay, the corporate structure, the CEO, then the CEO of diseases says we should all wear masks. So we all agree, and then of course not everyone agrees, and then no one really examines like whether that's a good goal or not. It's like, well, wait, no, I didn't agree. No one agreed to nominate that the CDC was our CEO. And then everyone's like, no, they are. And that, it's like but again, I think it's very like corporate thinking in a way. And again, maybe that's a benefit or detriment to me is that I've very rarely been involved in corporations like that throughout my existence, like in a work life way. Right. So in some ways that kind of thinking is, I barely understand it, or to me, it's like, it's something really reserved for the realm of like that which is ineffably, religiously, eternally, foundationally, like logos level true. And everything else is like, well, everything else is a negotiation. I've always worked either freelance. So then I'm like, well, then I can leave, or it's a sort of temporary agreement to then, obey this sort of hierarchical structure. But it is fascinating how much we love hierarchical, again, like you were talking about containers, organization systems, hierarchical structures give us that sense of safety. And I would contend, actually, in a lot of cases, do actually grant us some degree of safety, right? I mean, this is the whole premise behind the wall. Why Donald Trump talking about building a wall made a ton of people feel great. Build a wall, cool. Put a fence around the playground. Yes, great. I would feel so much better if you did that. Build a wall around the country. Yes, I'd feel so much better if you did that. I would feel safe from external invasion, right? Which is
so smart in a way. I still think building a wall is like wildly impractical, and I don't really understand it, but whatever. And I just don't think walls, I don't really like walls in general. I don't like fences in general. Now I own a home for the first time, would like heavily consider like building a fence for the safety of our children, essentially. And I was like, oh gosh, but I hate fences. It's very hard for me. So, but I understand the motivation of that, right? The Trumpian motivation of build a wall. And then, the Chicago, that's exactly what Chicago did. That's what they built, a wall, a segregative wall. It was like, that's what people do. They're like, just tell me, even if it's not true, tell me the bad people will stay outside.
Right.
And it's everyone's into it. There's no, like, in terms of like ideologically, like statistically, everyone, that means there are outliers and exceptions, but like, quote unquote, everyone's into some degree of that, of having a front door, of having walls, of having tent walls, of whatever, having a structure that like tells you, putting a blanket over your head to keep the monsters away. Like, we all function from that sort of safety premise. And I was actually thinking about this. Let me just lay this out there, see if this sparks anything interesting. I was thinking, this is what's so interesting about Democrats and Republicans, as they, especially recently, these are both hot button issues, one of which we've talked about, one of which we haven't yet, but I think we will in the future. And that Republicans and Democrats both have very issues they're super passionate about. They're essentially about safety from external invasion. Okay, here's my thesis. The two, the sort of two policies or two laws or two goings on in the United States that make us most safe from foreign invasion are the Second Amendment and legal abortion. The Second Amendment, because in the Red Dawn scenario, country that comes in here doesn't know who in the hell is packing, because it could be flipping everybody. So that's an intimidating prospect, right? When Ukraine got invaded by Russia, they literally were handing out assault rifles, y'all. They were literally like, anybody, grandmas can come get one. Everyone come get a weapon. Whereas here, I mean, it's broadcast across the world, and I think intentionally, that like we have more guns than people. So if you want to invade the US, eventually every war has to end up with ground troops. So when you get to that realm, have fun, buddy. Grandma's packing, kids are packing. You know what I mean? We're shooting up schools, right? We're crazy over here. Don't come get us. And then the abortion thing is basically, we're so fucking crazy that we will kill our own kids. And if we will murder our own children, just think what we do to you. You're a stranger. You're a foreign invader. That's how we will go all the flipping way. So both of those, and I think this is my premise. I think this is psychologically true, that for Republicans and Democrats, that is part of why both of those issues are fundamentally protective and about safety, in terms of in the grand world sense. Like they keep China, both of those keep China from invading us in a way.
Well, I'll pick up the first one briefly, which is, that makes perfect sense to me. It seems like in multinational warfare, this relates actually to something else I wanted to bring in about predictability, right?
Yeah.
It's like a risk analysis we often go back to, right? So if you're talking about war, and that's changed pretty dramatically, right? Like compared to when it was just, I don't know, material war, right? Like big ships and armies and stuff. And then it became we're like the Cold War, and then now we're in this information war, and who knows what next. And you're right, at the end of the day, that in a weird way, that does make me feel more safe. And a lot of people carry a gun. Again, anecdotally, people I've heard from who I know carry guns, that makes them feel more safe, right? Yeah. And but it's kind of like I remember when SUVs were coming out, and my family was like super anti-SUV. We're like, we have a sedan, and it was really hilarious because it was like we're all packed in this little sedan, and we got a car carrier and all this shit. And it's like, but then it became like this so-called safety war. There's always like this escalation thing, right? Where it's like, oh well, shit, and now for me to be safe, I have to have an SUV, and so I feel like that's often a factor in pretty much most of these conversations. But one of the things I wanted to mention was a somatic practitioner I really enjoy, part of her community, Abigail Rose Clark, and she often relates things to biology in a really cool way. And I remember her talking once about just like a cellular membrane, right? So for those of us who kind of want to look to nature as maybe holding more wisdom and answers than which I correlate with God, yeah, maybe there's something there. And it's like, well, a cellular membrane lets certain things out and doesn't let certain things, or let certain things in and not other things, right? It's specifically filtering for certain, I don't know, molecules, particles, whatever it is. So there's something quite natural about boundaries. And so to me, I'll say, if I were just to name, two things, like boundaries and agreements that are pretty consistent for me. And so going back to what you're saying about a fence potentially being like a healthy boundary, and it seems like now a whole separate thing, I don't know that we've touched on too much, like I'm not all in on like property ownership as a healthy thing, because I think that isolates us and divides us in communal structures that ultimately makes us less safe, because then we don't know our neighbors. If I don't know half the people on this block. I would feel more safe if I knew everybody, and I knew,
well, unless they were terribly unsafe people.
That's true. So maybe ignorance can be bliss.
I think that I'm not a fence person, but I was like trying to understand fence people. I think that's the thing. They're like, I was like, oh no, my neighbors are not trustworthy people. That's why I don't like fences, because for that same thing you're talking about. It was like, they don't, like it explicitly says that. It was like, I don't trust y'all.
And so one thing, this was just bubbling up for me lately, like, is one definition of safety. I mean, there's like the in the moment safety, like is somebody holding a gun to me, could I be shot, right? But more generally speaking, like, is safety about, or feeling safe? Because you kind of brought up this idea of, I think before our little break, like, is the perception of safety, is that safety? And so in that lens, I would say it's about predictable expectations to some extent. So years ago, I mean, God, a long time ago, maybe 20 years ago, I was toying with this little equation for happiness, and it was simply reality divided by expectation. So if your reality exceeds your expectations, then you're going to be happy. And I never quite thought that was like the right equation, so I haven't thought much about it. But recently, I was like, wait a minute, maybe that's an equation for safety. Which we could try to correlate safety and happiness, but
sure,
like, I was like, so I'm curious about that. Like, what is the relationship between expectations, predictable expectations, and safety?
Well, it's interesting, even correlating directly to, like, well, A, masculine and feminine for the egg and the sperm, and then B, in the immigration standpoint, right, which is like, again, except like if people are coming over the border illegally, that's unacceptable. That's an unaccepted passage, right? So the expectation is people will go through the immigration process. You set the process and you set the container out, and it's like, you will go through the process, and then that will keep everyone chill. Like, I don't know anybody, I'm sure there are people, but I don't know anybody who's anti-immigration, who's like, don't let anybody in from anywhere. But they're just like, you have to go through the process, and if it sucks and it's hard for you, like, tough luck. That's the measure. You don't get to penetrate every orifice you desire just because that orifice is super sexy, essentially, right? They're like, illegal immigration is, yes, I'm literally correlating illegal immigration to rape, because I want to take it to reproduction. When you're talking about like permeable and non-permeable membranes, and this is also interesting for masculine feminine energy too, in terms of expectations. Then the masculine energy, just if we are sperm-like, is to seek to permeate the membrane, whether or not it allows us or not. And we're just in a lot of trying to get there first, right? And then the membrane is trying to be preservative, right? And again, this is why I think feminism is also partially responsible for our safetyism culture, and that I actually think that's part of what the feminine energy is for, is to be protective. And I think part of the masculine energy is to be assaultive. Like, it's important for us to have the capacity to invade, to like break out of norms, and I think that's why generally, again, not exclusively, but that's why like males tend towards innovation, like mass innovations or whatever, like provocative innovations, as well as invading other countries. So it's positive and negative, than women, because women tend to be like, here's where we're at. How do we make this place safe? And if you don't have safety, it's actually quite difficult, some degree of safety, it's very difficult to innovate. So these are mutually interdependent processes, not to suggest one is superior to the other. All of that filters to, I think, to in many ways sort of support your theory. But then, and this is why like feelings of safety based on expectation, therefore happiness, would vary different by not only by human temperament or masculine feminine energy, but literally by men and women as well. Although it's interesting too, like the one kink in the works to work out the formula, because I like your formula, is there is now you're setting yourself up for, if that formula is true, you're setting up yourself up for some psychological failure in that you can actually have a impoverished or depressed or anxious response when things don't go poorly when you expect them to, right? So this can loop us all the way back to the talk about police, right? So then if you expect police things to kind of likely go poorly and they don't, you can get out of a police situation and still have a negative association with that, like an anxious, negative feeling because it didn't turn violent, you know? And women have to, and this is why I bring up women a lot, is like in this context, women statistically, if they're being reasonable, have a higher anxiety as to physical danger, being generally physically weaker and just statistically more prone to receiving sexual violence, assault, etc. So that means actually then you're in a double bind, meaning you're anxious already because of that. But then when your expectations aren't met, when someone doesn't assault you in that situation, you actually have a second sort of, in many ways, maybe like a sort of a dopamine drop. And so you're doubly anxious when things don't go wrong. Because then even this is not how statistics work, but I think this is how the human brain often takes statistics. It's like, uh-oh, I got through this time. That means next time I'm probably even more likely to get assaulted. It didn't happen
or
this
it's
time.
just or it's like less predictable, like, oh crap, like I thought I knew this game and how to survive it, and now holy crap, like what?
Nothing bad happened.
I met a nice cop. Oh shit, like what does that mean?
That makes me less safe. So in some ways this is the good thing about pushing yourself into like quote unquote adverse scenarios, whether this is in conversation or ice baths or whatever, flipping combat or mental jujitsu or physical jujitsu, all those sorts of things. So like putting yourself in uncomfortable positions on a regular basis is, I think, this is just my thesis, is the way to sort of escape the negative parts of safetyism. Constantly challenging your physical and mental assumptions about what makes you safe. And this is why I hew politically like towards liberalism, classic liberalism, which is like you have to stay open, right? There should only be brave spaces if we're really trying to be more safe, because as you create safe spaces, then everything else feels unsafe relatively until you're in a Black Mirror episode and you're in these like abjectly sterile environments, which we've talked about before in terms of technology, actually makes you more susceptible to disease outside of that environment. And the next thing you know, and this is a general thesis, I've not invented this, once you're outside of safe spaces, like once kids leave safe spaces at college, they get in the world and they're like, what the hell? People are monsters. You know what I mean? And then you become infuriated. You know what I mean? You're just like, and then you get into this binary thinking because you're so flipping freaked out. And then and then next thing you know, you're Jon Stewart, where you're like, if you don't agree with my gun control laws that I say are going to solve this problem, you don't care about dead kids. You're like, oh snap, that's where you get to, where you're like, because then you're just telling someone you're anti-safety in the most fundamental sense. And they're like, oh no, none of us want to, I'm just saying, I'm always trying to bump us into a landing. None of us want to get there, y'all. That is not, it may seem cool because you can get retweeted and you can go viral or whatever, but that's not a healthy place to be at all. Like Jon Stewart is not in a healthy place when it comes to gun control, for example, because of this safety concept. And we want to be like, oh, when someone's triggered or whatever, let's inspect it. Same thing you're talking. Let's come around people. Doesn't mean you stop pushing. You could be like, why don't you feel safe? Why you continue to make them unsafe? I mean, that's all. If there's cookies in an open door and an unlocked door, I feel like you're you're in the clear. Don't lock the door and don't not provide cookies.
I was told there would be punch and pie. Well, this may blow up your interest in coming in for landing, but I don't want to leave this conversation without naming something which we've talked about a bit and we'll continue to talk about, which is in the context of the Nashville shooting, the shooter was identified as trans, and that led to a pretty interesting societal response. But in the context of trans safety, my working every day with somebody who identifies as trans, knowing a number of trans folks, in my experience, every single one of them feels less safe. And tells stories of that, and even something like walking through the airport, just how they're treated, how they're looked at, how they're whatever, all the way down to the other end of the spectrum of physical violence. And I remember several months ago, I think you provoked me to, I don't know, do some more research around it, and the reality was at that time I couldn't find a whole lot of evidence that there was more violence. And so I trust that there is. I just do, because again, like I so am over sort of biased towards the anecdotes and stories of people I know. So I'm curious if you want to tag into any of that in the context of trans safety specifically, and with a response to the recent shooting.
Well, I mean, that would, to me, I would slap my thesis on it until disproven of that. The perception of safety is the problem there more than actual safety. I don't statistically. I mean, until we can prove it, then are they unsafe? Yes. Are we all unsafe? Yes. Are you more unsafe? I would incline to say I wouldn't be shocked if there were. There isn't compelling evidence that a trans identifying person is more unsafe. Then again, you have to adjust for a ton of co-founders, right? Confounders or co-founders or whatever, comorbidities, psychological or comorbidities. The reason I would assume there would likely be a slight uptick as related to safety is a trans person is a less safe person to everybody else. Meaning containers keep us safe. So males identifying as males and females identifying as females is I would say the quotidian mind, right? And this is kind of based on my premise of like, are trans people higher order? Are they higher evolved beings? Because that to me is the only tenable premise really to sort of like cleave to affirming trans identity. So if they are, let's say they aren't, for just sake of argument, they're just the same as all the rest of us. Then they have abandoned a central or foundational container or fence. And it's not about expression. It's not about looking like, but it's attendant to looking like. But now we're in a situation where people don't just look like, but then they're saying they are not. So they're saying they're not in a container that most human beings throughout human history believed was an impermeable membrane. So then they're functioning as though that membrane is now not only permeable, but it is imminently permeable by volition, by mere volition or decision, right? That you can just simply decide, and then you are this. And not only that, but then people have to agree with your new container. You've devised a new container. That makes people feel fundamentally unsafe. And so there's something, but I think you have to expect that, right? This is part of, we've talked about drag a teeny bit on our text, but like that's part of one of the titillations of drag or cross-dressing in general is, oh, you're violating the container. We all know you are. That's kind of part of why it's fun, is go, oh gosh, you're going that, what if I don't have to? What if I could do this? You're like, oh gosh, what if? It feels like magic. It's tightrope walking, right? But tightrope walking is, for most people, unsafe. I've tried to walk on a slack line. I fall on the ground. I hurt myself.
Oh, it's so hard. It's really the hardest.
Yeah. I don't know if it's my inner core strength or whatever. It's just, it's not well rehearsed. Anyway,
well, so I want to point out the way you dress is atypical
Yes.
of
Yeah,
I'd say the average American white man. So
yeah.
you may even experience some of that.
Oh, I'm sure I make people feel unsafe.
You express outside of the container, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
I understand. Well, I understand that about trans-identifying persons. Like, and I believe this is true of trans-identifying people, that they like making people feel unsafe. That is part of the joy of going, I don't care whether this makes you feel unsafe. This makes me feel more safe. I live that way. Any trans-identifying person who moves into some like overt expression of such is being a provocateur like myself. So again, I'm not condemning of that. Like, how dare you? People, help people. Would you help everybody? You're here for everyone. I was like, all right, well, what's best for everyone? You know, it's a tenable thesis that provocation is tenable. But this, take it back to myself. I felt very provoked and very triggered by I felt unsafe. I feel actually phenomenally unsafe because of the Nashville shooting. We could talk about this in gun control episodes, so I'll try to do a microcosm of this. But this was the first shooting I've ever seen where the identity of the people shot was under discussed to a degree I've never seen before. And the identity of the shooter was highlighted as to the sort of anti-blank hate thing. And I've talked about it with you a lot. And this has been highlighted by, I just read a piece by All Sides about it. They were like, oh, this is the first time the president has not mentioned the religious affiliation of a religiously assaulted group. He laughed. Our president, Joseph Biden, literally laughed when someone said, oh, Senator Hawley said Christians were targeted here. You know, would you think this is a hate crime? And he was like, well, if he said it, probably not. Now, listen, gallows humor, I don't condemn him as like, what a monster. Gallows humor is very normal, I think, if you're the president, and the amount of like horror that you have to learn about on a daily basis. I'm not condemning him for that. But it made me realize that I was like, oh, whatever classes, because I am a Christian. So then I was like, oh, I'm certainly not a protected class in terms of the national media or the White House or whatever. I was like, they don't give a rat's patoot about whatever group I'm part of. Such that, again, comparing the Atlanta shootings is a great example. The Atlanta spa shootings, and Biden just mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, brought up the anniversary of it, and he was like, and anti-Asian hate across the country. Let me just remind everyone, there still is not a single tether of anti-Asian sentiment or hate as related to the Atlanta spa shootings, but that's how they were covered. I think that's how most people still assume that they had anything to do with. There's not been one whit. I challenge you to go look it up. That person shot Asian people, and I think a Mexican dude, and then another, like a white lady, shot a whole bunch of different people. Shot a whole bunch of people at spas. It was spa worker hate. Anyways, so that for some reason, the shooter didn't even target a community, but they made it, meaning the national news media and the White House, made it about that community, right? And how afraid everyone was, how unsafe they were, even though this incident had nothing tenable to do with the safety of that community. Then when a community of Christians is shot, the national coverage, including the White House, talked about the lack of safety and anti-trans hate, even though not a single trans person was shot. It was just a trans-identifying person who went and shot people. So I was like, okay, wait a second. So I'm in some sort of category, I guess, as a person in this culture where my identity is so unimportant that the identity of the shooter, the murderer, is actually the thing we need to be focusing on in helping protect and keep society safer. I was like, that is so, that's just nonsensical from an objective, like rational point of view. It's hypocritical, obviously, but then, and that made me I struggled with it all this week, kind of a sense of like deeper anxiety, where I was like, oh, I'm being told specifically that, and I was like, they don't do this to anybody else. Like when the Buffalo shooter went in and shot a bunch of black folks, like only black folks, they were like, black folks, y'all need to be, the black folks are scared. And I was like, yeah, they flipping should be. That's flipping horrifying. That's terrible. When a bunch of Christians were shot up only, then they were like, yeah, well, trans people need to be afraid. So imagine if after the Buffalo shooting, they were like, man, white people, you need to be concerned. Like we would have all been like, what the hell is wrong with you? What is wrong with you? This is crazy town. So that made me feel unsafe, meaning that I was like, oh, fundamentally, the person who runs this country is not concerned about safety as relates to any identity markers that I may hold. Or I would say in that case, like the most fundamental, essential identity marker. So I thought this shooting was really provocative and interesting.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing vulnerably about how it really impacted you. And I think one thing that's coming up is like the lack of the perception of safety.
Yeah.
And certainly actual safety in terms of physical safety.
Yeah.
The lack of perception of safety begets lack of safety. That, right? Like, so again, anecdotally, certainly, and I think there's some evidence of, people targeting trans folks because the shooter was trans. So there's a component of that. And I need to dig deeper in that.
Yeah, there's been there's not. They highlighted anti-trans legislation, which is a biased term. So stopping someone from.
I just wouldn't be surprised even if it was one person, but I assume more that was like, oh, I'm gonna hate on trans people because a trans person shot up a bunch of people, right? Now, does that warrant the oversimplification of? I think what something we're both very sensitive to is just like it's like you can only choose one group.
Yeah.
Or you can only choose one group to protect. You can only choose one group to have empathy for. You can only choose one narrative to support.
Yeah.
And in this case, it was like, oh, like trans people are generally more targeted, more, experiencing less safety. And so what we're most worried about here is like the narrative I'm picking up is that the retaliation against the trans community is going to be so severe because the shooter was trans,
right.
that's who we need to protect,
which creates it. Yeah,
right. And you're speaking vulnerably about being a Christian and saying, okay, I don't know, maybe, but what about the people who are actually shot and the identity of those people too? So they
don't believe. Well, the thing is like that's that I think that is the theory, but it's not an objective. It's this is another principle that we can talk about in a separate issue or whatever. But like, I think the hard thing is it's gross. It is objectively hypocritical, but it's only objectively hypocritical via principle, meaning like when people are victimized, we empathize with victims. That is not the principle being applied. I think the principle is, no, there are particular groups we care about and particular groups we don't, in which case it's not hypocritical. Like we care about Asians. So then if Asians are afraid, but this is the wild thing though, in creating coverage, which has no basis in reality other than conjecture, and then literally ignoring the actual functional reality of who got killed, then you're creating, this is the same thing with the anti-Asian thing after the Atlanta spa shooting, you're creating that fear. You're creating the sense of lack of safety, even though it has not, and tethering it to something that has nothing to do with it. So that's the thing that like, that is, I don't care what your thesis is or what your premise or principle or lack thereof is, that's not helpful. Like that's you're not helping anyone by making people more afraid of something based on something that's literally like saying if someone choked on a popsicle and then you did a story about how people have been choking on chicken bones and you really need to be scared of chicken bones. You're just like, wait, what are you talking? Like,
because choking is possible.
Because choking, because violence is possible. You Asians, you really need to be worried about it in life because look how bad it can get. You're like, well, that has nothing to do with this. So then what do you even, and so to me, once you at that point, you're in a misrepresentation, or in the case of the Atlantic shootings, you're lying, like they're lying. There's no, they're just, or they're inventing. It's a fabrication. And so I was like, and likewise with this, again, I've read extensively articles. I was like, wait, why are they saying this? Did something happen? Like after Nashville, did someone go and like bust up like a trans bar or something. Like what happened? And all anyone referenced was quote unquote anti-trans legislation, which in and of itself, so I was like, well, that's not objectively true either, because all quote unquote anti-trans legislation I've ever read, and I've read a ton of it, it's not anti-trans at all. It literally is just, it's arguing about what means are best to help people who identify as trans. Some people who say you should affirm, some people who say you should deny. Neither one of those are anti that person, a trans identifying person. And we should argue openly as to like, how do you best help people? So I was like, that's the wild thing. It just makes people feel unsafe. And I'm assuming at this point that it's on purpose. Like they want, I would say in general, the media wants people to feel unsafe because then they're more likely to click. And obviously the federal government wants us to feel unsafe because then we feel like we need them.
Right.
So once you create that, and this is the thing with safe spaces too, if you create the sense that people are going to like, then they need you to kind of help protect them. And I was like, well, we do all need each other. But again, just like you were talking about, once you start centralizing power or authority figures who are the only ones who can help provide this safety for you, or even a philosophy, then we start retreating from each other and become, like you said, we start building fences and we become less safe.
Yeah, my basic disposition is this escalation won't end well.
No,
like that's not the path. That will just keep escalating and I think decreasing safety overall. Right.
Yeah.
When do we need to come in for a landing? What the heck was the question even? Does safety make us safe? I'm gonna go with no on this.
Yeah.
Go with no.
I'm gonna stay. Let's agree on this one. I'll say no. I mean, it's a mixed bag as we've discussed at this point, but I would say generally, principally, dominantly, meaning more than 50%. I'm gonna stick with no. I think we're agreeing on this one. But at the same time, thank you as always. Thank you always, not just in agreeing with me, but actually in sometimes quite the opposite of making my heartbeat race or pump up or my body get hotter. Thank you for helping me feel safe without indulging safetyism by listening, responding, sharing, exploring together. And just all the myriad ways you've loved me ideologically and materially.
You're welcome, and thank you for loving me. Until we meet again quite soon, my friend.
I love you, safe space.
Love you. See you soon. Bye.
Bye.